Before getting into the issues, I have been very much impressed by both professors in terms of their way of critical thinking and looking at issues from their own perspectives and trying to find out the truth. And I admire those professors, two professors' efforts in this regard. And I was thinking that why don't they come to live in Japan and teach at the Japanese universities and hold English speaking lectures all the time. I would like to touch upon three dimensions, three issues. One is risk assessment issues. And number two is risk management issues. And number three is risk communication issues. As far as risk assessment issue, I think both professors have referred to the issue of the kind of scientific risk assessment and the issue which is not really related to science, but the kind of sentiment or psychological attitude of the people or the sense of assurance. And these are, I understand, very different things. And personally, when I was director of US-Japan economic relations, I was involved in BSE negotiation. And on a number of occasions, I was having a discussion with US meat export export group and other the associated groups. And in a sense, it's a similar discussion, whether we would just introduce international standards as the practice of importing goods from overseas, and whether there is a sense of assurance or security among the consumers. And in Japanese, I guess from the days of, as I recall, Fukuda administration, there was a discussion of anzen and anshin. So anzen is safety, I guess that's science, more science. And anshin is being assured. So it's a similar discussion that we are having in this country. And so this is something we have to look into, taking it into account both the psychological dimension, but at the same time, we have to base our policy on science. And I think this is something we have to keep in our mind as public policymakers in coming up with new policies or in reviewing our existing policy. And this just moves on to the issue of risk management. And it is so important to integrate public policy making and scientific knowledge, or in some cases, psychological dimensions as well. And this is something I have been feeling after 3/11 in terms of how we would be able to come up with a science-based policy in confronting with a new reality of uncertainty. And it is always difficult to know everything, and in many cases, the government, I've been playing the role of an international spokesperson, and I have been always asked by journalists, but maybe the Japanese government must be hiding something. You should know this kind of fundamental data and facts. Why don't you know these kind of issues? And of course, it is often very difficult to prove that the government doesn't actually have those kind of information. But this is something which is lingering. And another issue is how we pay attention to the concerns of related to children or, for example, pregnant women. And Prime Minister Noda, in his first policy speech at the Diet, at the Japanese Diet, he had made clear that as a government, we pay particular attention to the concerns related to children or pregnant women. And also, he moved on to say that without rebirth of Fukushima, there is no rebirth of Japan. So, politically speaking, this is extremely important issues to tackle. And there are real concerns. So, in the context of tackling the issue of post-3/11 situations, we had opportunities to listen to different views, scientist point of view. In some cases, the scientific advisors' viewpoints differ. So recommendation may not be consistent. And there needs to be a political judgment to be made. So there are real issues in terms of how we could integrate scientific knowledge into real public policy making. And with regard to the issue of international standards, Professor Allison talked about the ICRP, and I do not, I'm not really in a position to confirm, his case, but I think, this Fukushima situation, post-3/11 Fukushima situation, will provide valuable scientific data for scientists to analyze and prove, whether Professor Allison's perspective turned out to be true or not. And this is, I think, the obligation of the Japanese government, all along in cooperation with the municipal governments and others, to provide data or lessons learned to the international community, and hope that the international scientists will be able to come to Fukushima on many occasions to actually study this subject. And I would like to just move on to final issues of communication. There were both Professor Allison and Professor Tokuhiro talked about the trust in government. And in my responsibility, I have been trying to engage international press or international business community in Tokyo. And it is really a challenge, to establish trust in government. And this is, there are both issues of lack of information, and in many cases, there are issues of intercultural communications, maybe. And this is something probably the Japanese government, needs to learn lessons, especially in the arena of intercultural communications. And this relates to the issue of, in order to establish trust, how we could be transparent in our policy making and the data that we have gathered, accountable, and also how we could maintain independence of some of the regulatory organizations. We have decided to move Nuclear Industrial Safety Agency, which is a regulatory agency of power utility companies, to Environment Ministry. And this is one small step forward, but probably we should have started this kind of discussion before 3/11. And very lastly, Professor Allison referred to the issue of education. And I'm feeling that maybe education from different meanings, but it is extremely important for the Japanese society to look back on what has been happening and how we could, maybe from the viewpoint of government, how we could improve our ability to communicate on scientific issues. And I have seen some good examples, for example, from UK Prime Minister's office in his presentation, Sir John Beddington's presentation on the issues related to post-Fukushima issues. And this is something I think our society needs to squarely face if we want to open up our country and try to engage international business or community in this country. And on this, I think we have a still long way to go. But this is something we need to do things better. And very lastly, I really appreciate both Professor Tokuhiro and Professor Allison for giving us such a intellectually stimulating arguments today. Thank you.